I suppose you're not in them anymore, but were they good bands?
I mean, I thought they were good. We were a little behind our time. It was already the band I started in high school. It was already like 2006, and we started a ska band. So it's like, so we were like 5 years behind the death of most ska. So it was just fun.
Yeah. Do try to bring the mic stand as close to the edge of the table as possible. Just because I don't know, just based on the gain settings and the fact that these are, dynamics very directional.
Yeah.
You do have to almost eat the mic. I mean, these are SM58s, so
you need to get like guards on these if you're getting people this close.
The pop filters?
Yeah.
I thought about getting pop filters, and I did, but I didn't realize that apparently the more common size pop filters are like 6 inches in diameter. And so if you were to set them up correctly with these mics, you would obscure the face of whoever you were talking to.
Yeah.
Which I suppose doesn't really make sense. Yeah, if I'm doing a podcast where I'm trying to have conversations with people, it'd be weird not to see their faces. Otherwise, we might as well do a remote kind of recording.
So you ready to go?
Well, yeah, I've been ready. We've been rolling for a bit. But.
I know. I just don't. I wasn't sure what you wanted. If you want to, where you want to start.
We don't have to start anywhere, really.
Okay.
In the end, we're just talking. Well, actually, when this goes up, would you rather I refer to you as Zach or Zachary?
Zach's fine.
Okay.
No one calls me Zachary.
Well, how you been?
Good.
How's things?
Exhausting. It's the beginning of the semester. Fall semester is. I mean, as crazy as it is for you as a student, it's for faculty and staff. It's insane. Just so much work to get everything going for the whole year.
Yeah. Did you ever finish setting up all the computers with the Adobe Suite?
Yep, they are all ready to go. The full Adobe Suite is finally updated. Everything's running smoothly. DaVinci Resolve is set up on every computer, especially because with our new Blackmagic cameras, you need DaVinci Resolve to deal with Blackmagic's new codecs. You can't there's no plugins yet to put them into Premiere, so you have to go through their own software, DaVinci.
Right. And are you only teaching Intro to Filmmaking this semester?
I'm teaching Intro to Filmmaking and Documentary Filmmaking. I usually teach 2 classes a semester.
Okay. How's that going?
Great. I've never gotten the chance to teach a just full documentary class before. And it's funny, for the last 6 years or so, all I've been doing is making documentary and experimental work. So it's exciting to actually teach something that's completely in my wheelhouse rather than, even Intro to Film is a lot of narrative work, which is not something I personally really do.
Not really?
Yeah, I don't really make any narrative films. Pretty much nonfiction with everything.
If I recall correctly, Intro to Filmmaking is not normally offered in the fall, right?
That's correct.
It's more of the progression is normally like Intro to Film in fall and Intro to Filmmaking in the spring.
Right. It's kind of set up with the idea freshman film majors coming in will take Intro to Film, which is kind of Intro to Film Studies, an overlook of just really starting to talk about cinematic terms. And then by the fall or by the spring, they can take Intro to Filmmaking and, just get their kind of feet wet with cameras and specifically professional gear. Luckily, the way technology is progressing, a lot of people are used to shooting 4K on their phones now, but the issue is unless, they come from some kind of usually music background in high school, say, no one really has the professional audio or specifically professional lighting gear down. They've never touched it usually.
I remember when I was taking Intro to Filmmaking with you, I've told you before, I'm not despite being you think as a musician I would have experimented with and know a bit about recording, but I don't think it was very much until our class that I did get my feet wet in terms of trying to record sound and learn how to engineer and produce it.
Yeah, it's just, it's so different than anything else, getting especially like field recording, location sound work, as well as, we in the intro class we really don't get into like really like studio audio work, like say ADR work, or even just in studio like Foley work, because most of the intro class is really like about kind of run and gun guerrilla filmmaking. It's not like we don't have the time to like talk about all the kind of like crews on a set, what those different departments would need to do to create like say a longer narrative work.
When I was in there, it almost kind of felt like the equivalent of like a bunch of kids using like a Super 8 camera. Like it's very much, since the equipment is so limited, it's or rather our experience and wherewithal to put something together was so limited. It's almost like you just shoot it and then you cut it together.
Yeah,
kind of like if you're just a kid with like a Super 8.
Yeah, it's pretty much that, except that it's professional gear. That's the big difference is just to start getting everyone to understand professional gear, and more importantly, how to manually use it. Because even, I've noticed that students have come in with video skills from like high school programs. They've used the cameras or similar cameras sometimes, but they've always just done things like put it on auto, or like they were just told, just press this button. Most of them, the ones that even know like say like what white balance is, have no idea like the theoretical concepts behind why you need to say white balance a camera. So that's really all that intro class is. A lot of people are coming in with different skill sets. A lot of people nowadays have backgrounds on DSLR cameras, which for a while was the most affordable way to shoot professional video, probably for about 5-6 years there.
Yeah.
Until like all these companies, Panasonic, Sony, Blackmagic, Canon, all started coming out with cinema cameras, which is, it's really interesting to me. For someone who wasn't into, like, when I started making film, not really into the technology side of it, I've just transitioned so much into it, partially just from doing years of freelance work, because you need to know what's on the market and what's the best for what you're doing and the most affordable for what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. I still don't know how to use those cameras, but even after an entire semester's worth of classes where that was the main thing we would use. But like for all the little projects where we would have to film stuff, I used my own DSLR.
Right. But I mean, at this point, with the way cameras change so fast, I almost don't want you guys to just be like, learn this, like, just memorize how one camera works. I'd rather you guys learn, understand exposure, composition, more the theoretical terms that you can take and learn a new camera. So if you have all those like concepts down and you understand like how to change depth of field quickly and really understand how the camera works, hopefully you'll get to the point where you can sit down with a manual for a new camera, read it one day, play with the camera for a few days, and then feel comfortable enough, to shoot something. I would still argue that you should always, if you're going to shoot like a big project, shoot it on a camera,
Yeah.
Even people I went to grad school with sometimes forgot about that. They're like, someone's shooting their thesis project, and they're like, oh, I got this great deal on this like Canon C500. I guess it was the 300. But, and they're like, great. So you got it for 2 weeks. It's coming the day before you start shooting. And you're hired a cinematographer who works exclusively with Panasonic gear. So it's just like, luckily the cinematographer is great and he did his research. But again, that camera has some issues with just like noise and gain that unless you're used to working with it, you probably wouldn't know the workaround so much.
For audio?
No, for video.
Oh.
Because,
when you said gain, I thought you meant as in...
No, I mean, you can have gain on video too. It's mostly is more like when we're talking about like ENG cameras and video cameras, because traditionally they don't have like ISO settings,
right?
Like a DSLR or like a cinema camera would. Mm-hmm. So they have like kind of like you adjust this digital gain to kind of change the sensitivity of the sensor.
Oh, okay.
But again, the issue is Just like if you push the ISO too much, you get that. It's a digital noise pretty much because
image noise that looks kind of grainy.
Right, because you're losing. Usually, when you pump that up, especially if you're pumping it up to like fix for exposure, you're like losing detail, especially in the blacks.
On some level, I guess I have knowledge about like exposure, but that's more from like taking photography classes,
right?
Where we worked with film photography, and I would say I understand how to do that, film photography, but I haven't really figured out how that translates to digital video, doing digital video.
Well, I mean,
because the way I understand, it's shutter speed and your f-stop, and you have to change those in like an inverse direction or something in order to maintain the correct amount of exposure while changing details like the depth of field or motion blur in a still image.
Right.
But then I'm not sure how that works in motion picture.
Well, I mean, take cinematography. It's either going to be offered next semester or in the fall. I'm not sure yet, but like that's the same thing because we have photography majors at least once a year come over to take like an upper level production class, and that's the first thing they ask. They're like, "Oh, I have to have a fixed shutter speed. How do I change my depth of field?"
Yeah.
At that point, that just means you have to work with the other elements. So you're working with your aperture, the focal length of your lens, and then the third one that photographers don't really think about is
lighting.
Not even lighting, just the distance from your subject.
Right.
So those are the three things you're really working with. I mean, obviously lighting helps because if you have, professional lighting there, you can adjust the lighting to help get the exposure you want.
Right. Yeah, I still don't know how to.
Take cinematography. It'll teach you all that technical stuff. That's I usually teach cinematography for the most part. I have been the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, yeah. And it's a fun class because it's the only class that you'll pretty much do mostly group work. It's all about like learning how to be a camera crew for the most part.
Okay.
So how to be a director of photography, an assistant,
a gaffer.
Yeah.
Best boy and such.
Luckily we don't. It's not too complicated for us here. We don't gaffer wise because we currently don't own any tungsten lights over 1K. The issue is once you get above there, that's like when they are pulling so much power from a circuit, you have to worry about how much you plug into a circuit.
Yeah.
And that's the hard thing to understand is like, because the next step up, which is like a 2K, which is kind of like a small light for like a professional set. Mm-hmm. For the most part, if you put it in like a residential plug, you can only run one off that whole circuit.
I didn't have that problem when I was like shooting my short films.
Well, luckily everything's starting to go LED for the most part. A lot LED lighting has become a lot better, and that's not so much of a concern, especially because most of the time they can just run off like the big V mount batteries, like the huge like block batteries.
Yeah,
which is great. So you don't really have to, and obviously they pull less energy than your traditional film lights.
Yeah.
But even though sometimes people are still doing that, some students have rented generators.
Really?
Yeah, someone rented one for their thesis film last year, but I think that was more of a location issue because they wanted to use lights, and I think they were like, lighting a street
building, or
I think they were just lighting a street.
Oh,
and for that kind of stuff, you want to make it seem like it's coming from the street lights, but obviously the street lights aren't going to be strong enough.
Yeah.
So what are you taking this semester, film-wise?
I'm taking animation with Professor Natton, and Sin 314 studies in Colon. This semester, it's the European road movie.
That should be good. I love a good road movie.
Well, most of them are like French, but...
Well, that's...
And this past week, we watched a 3-hour German thing by Wim Wenders.
Ooh, did you watch...
It's from 76.
Was it an American Friend?
It was Kings of the Road.
Okay.
I'm going to say half the movie was not necessary. But
I don't know. I love... Wim Wenders, just... just love everything about it, especially his compositions. They're just gorgeous. You should just watch Paris, Texas. It's a really good Wim Wenders film.
I was looking at the wiki page for some of his films while I was watching Kings of the Road, and I noticed Paris, Texas, and it won the Palme d'Or during its year of release, right?
Yeah, he's a really interesting director because he did some of his education in the U.S., so he has this really interesting perspective. A lot of his films deal with the issue of like American consumerism and especially like how that relates to like European culture.
Yeah. I noticed there were a few touches of like Americanisms in Kings of the Road. The lead guy, who's kind of blonde-ish with a mustache, he's driving this truck full of equipment he uses to repair projectors at movie theaters along the west coast of East Germany. And he would put in like what looked like 78s into this, I guess you could call disc player, but for, I guess, 78s. And a lot of records he would play were like American-ish kind of songs. And there was even a scene where they're both, him and this other guy are sitting at what looks like a cafe at a train station or something.
Yeah.
And they quoted that song Love in Vain, written by Robert Johnson and famously recorded by the Rolling Stones in '69 for Let It Bleed.
I mean, you also just like, it's fascinating, all of those like post-war like German directors, because think of it this way. So a lot of these of that like generation of new German cinema directors, so Wenders, Herzog, Schlorendorf, Fassbinder, they all like, were born around or right after World War II and grew up in like, a defeated Germany where almost all of the cultural influences coming in were coming from America. As a country, they were spending their time. I mean, the same with post-war France. Like both countries had to deal with so much of post-war issues that arts and culture weren't a big thing. So, Hollywood was just like, sell it, send it over. So it's like they had this whole influence of like American culture growing up.
Even I even heard like there's this one piece of music he would cut in to the movie in between what seemed like acts of the movie. That was like a real, very American sounding acoustic slide guitar kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was in a waltz. If you were watching a scene and that had no dialogue, you could have completely mistaken it for like an American movie, because it just seems like a couple of guys and what looks like an RV on the road with this sounded really well produced acoustic guitar track playing. It's like, and then if you watch long enough, they would start speaking German. You're like, wait a minute, what?
The thing is, I actually haven't even seen that Wenders film. But you're saying he was fixing like projectors and things? Yeah,
one of the main characters is this guy who works as a guy who fixes movie projectors.
Yeah,
he's a repairman for projectors.
I don't know. I personally like really enjoy stuff like that where there's a bit of like,
it's a little inside baseball about filmmaking or just movies.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of interested because I mean, a lot of your film for the intro class was, it's about process.
Yeah. So
I was just like, is that something? Are you interested in stuff like that too?
Movies about making movies,
or just,
you mean?
Yeah, I mean, because especially like personally as an artist, I'm fascinated about how other people like work, their process, just how they write. Who's the famous editor? Now there's a famous film editor that like super interesting because like when he switched to like digital editing, instead of like before like even like standing desks were starting to get popular, he was like using like a big drafting table so you could like tilt it. So he would tilt it and then just have monitors on the wall, and he would stand the whole time and edit like that. Can't remember the guy's name though.
Walter Murch?
Is it?
I don't know. I'm just throwing out names of like big editors who've been around long enough for their transition from film to digital, like Walter Murch or like Michael Kahn or
is it?
Although I think Michael Kahn may have only done digital a one time or a handful of times.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, anymore you have to know how to edit digitally. I mean, even films that are shot on film are edited digitally.
Yeah. I saw this thing Adobe put out about the Coen brothers, and they edit their own films under the pseudonym Roderick Janes.
Yeah.
They're real filmmakers. They shoot everything on film, except for like the last movie or the movie before that, Hail Caesar, I think might have been shot on digital.
Yeah.
And I think for the longest time they were working with like Final Cut, and then at some point they switched over to like Premiere for like Hail Caesar.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much everyone. So like Final Cut was like the real like first like professional, not the like non-linear editing software. So like, and it was like that forever. The issue is, about 10 years ago, Apple just became like such like what they are now of like, you need the newest thing. For the longest time, Apple was like was for the artist, for like the specialty person. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a reason that like still like graphic design exclusively like uses Macs. It's just like what they all like learned on and got used to. I'm the same way. I've been having a very hard time thinking that I'm finally going to have to transition over to a PC because I'm just tired of working on my computer constantly. I've had a Hackintosh for like 6 years, and I'm just tired of having to like problem solve it all the time if there's ever an issue. And more than half the time, you can't just like upgrade from one operating system to the next. Mm-hmm. You have to like wipe a drive and start completely fresh and then work through all the problems again to see if it will work. The only reason is because, first of all, the trash can was a horrible computer. Yeah, the black Mac Pro, it was the cylinder one.
Yeah.
Supposedly, I think they came out with the iMac Pro like a year and a half ago, which is a nice computer. It's the one that's in this lab right now that we're sitting in. My only problem with it is I think the entry level, before you put in any like heavy duty hardware, it's like just under $5,000. It's like my computer is almost the equivalent of this. It's probably 2 years out of date compared to this, but I built it myself for like just over $2,000. So you can't complain with those results. It's just a lot of working on it all the time.
Yeah. I would think, given like how I work, you would think I would be like a Mac person.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's something about Macs that, I mean, sure, I don't mind working on them, but I think it might have been just because I grew up using PCs.
Exactly.
And I got comfortable enough, familiar enough with them that I just knew how to work around in one. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think we got our first PC when I was in 6th or 7th grade. Before that, we always had Macs. My dad is a retired school teacher, and that's what he learned on in the 80s when he was like, for teaching purposes. And then he had a friend build him a Mac from scratch, and we had that when I was growing up. And then at some point, I guess, work switched over to PC, so we just bought like a standard Dell Tower, and then I had that for a few years. But by the time I was in high school, I was editing on Mac Pro Towers on I guess Final Cut 5 probably. So I just can't get away from. I like the workflow of a Mac. Plus the issue is I have 12 years of video work on Mac hard drives.
Yeah.
That is almost like, I have like almost 30 terabytes. So it's just like, what am I going to do? It'll be a hard transition.
Yeah, there are certain features I like about Macs that really work, like the how you can preview a file by hitting the space bar.
Yeah.
When you're looking for it in the Finder. But there's something about how, as like a loyal iPhone user, you would think I've had thoughts about getting a Mac.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, I want all the pixels and the whatever processor they're using, and like the fact that it looks so sleek or something. But I think at heart I've always been a PC user because, again, like the fact that I grew up using it and only ever used PCs really up until like I got exposed to Macs in like high school.
Yeah.
There's something about the way things are organized in a PC that works for me. Like I I suppose the way, like, I feel like most people who look at like a PC for the first time in their life, they're like, wait a minute. So you go to the start button and then you have to go like, wait, just like, you don't realize the amount of levels in which like things are organized and the information is organized in folders and such.
Yeah, that's a big thing for me. It took getting back. I didn't really start working on PCs again until I started teaching here, and the year I started teaching here, they just put in the brand new PC lab.
Yeah, I remember when right before I came in here, I came into the university. I was there to like look around or for orientation. And I remember looking into that room, and there were still Macs in there.
Yeah, and that's the really nice thing is that this department is growing and it's starting to get more funding than it's ever had because I did my undergrad here. Yeah. So we had 4, possibly 5. We had what? I think we had 2 Mac Pro towers, and then 3 iMacs. And that was it for the whole department. And it was a pain because people would be there for hours, and one of the things they would be doing is they would just be dumping footage because we were shooting on DV and then HDV tapes. So like it's not like
with tapes.
Yeah, so you can't like just drop a file like with an SD card. Pretty much, you do is you if you shot 2 hours on this tape, you'd play it back in normal time, and it would capture it onto the computer.
Right.
So like if you had shot a narrative and it was like on 3 tapes, you'd have to sit through all 3 tapes as they went onto the computer.
I remember back in high school, we were shooting using like camcorders, or not really I do remember they were like tapes you put into cameras. Yeah. And like you had to use a FireWire cable. Yep. But I can't remember if did it take that long to dump footage? I can't remember.
For the most part, yeah. For the most part, it was pretty much 1-to-1. If I remember correctly, at least when I started using DV, that was definitely it. My first camera was like a JVC, like consumer mini DV tape.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask where you're from?
Yeah. I'm originally from New Jersey.
Really?
Yeah. So, but like to make it clear, I'm from South Jersey.
I don't know what that means, but.
Well, I think North Jersey gets a bad reputation of like being like the nasty side of like New York City.
Well, okay.
But like South Jersey is the reason that New Jersey is called the Garden State. Like blueberry capital of the world, lots of cranberries, Jersey tomatoes. Pretty much for the most part, South Jersey is
a Zach Braff film.
No, not even. That's more North Jersey. Is like all barrier islands and resort towns. Yeah. And then you move into that, then it gets very rural. And then once you get to the other side, you get to like Trenton and Philadelphia. So suburbs of there. So like, yeah, like the high school I went to is one of 2 high schools in the country that is actually on the same block as the beach. It's the only one on the East Coast, and there's one in California. So like you would walk up to the front of the school, behind it was the football field, a parking lot, and then the boardwalk. So like we were like right there. Like we would, on nice days, we were, instead of like running the track, they'd let us run the boardwalk for gym, which was, I think they had to stop that. They realized that in the spring we were supposed to be running, and everyone would stop for popcorn and fries on the boardwalk.
And where in New Jersey is this?
I grew up in the town was Seaville. It's like 25 minutes south of Atlantic City, but then like my high school was in Ocean City. Very interesting. I think they still have the sign up there. It's been almost 15, 20 years. They won Travel Channel's like greatest family resort. Yeah. And it's still like on all the signs when you come in, but that's mostly just because it's a traditional dry town. Right. So it's kind of weird. It's the only like one of the barrier islands there that's like dry.
And then you came here to University of Hartford for undergrad?
Yep.
What influenced your decision to come here?
Pretty much there was like 2 schools in like South Jersey that like kind of everybody goes to. From
Rutgers and
no, we're further south than that. It's Rowan University, which is outside Philadelphia. Right. And then Stockton, which is now Stockton University. When I was there, it's just Stockton College. It was like this weird old kind of like, we jokingly like hippie school from like the 60s and 70s that just like it wasn't a full university, but it wasn't a community college. It was just a small college.
Right.
But it was just always funny because they're like, you'd see pictures on the wall if you walk through, and they're like from like the first days of the university, and you're like, what is this? Is this a class that these are pictures of? Oh, they're like, yeah, that's the philosophy class. And what it was like all these like Art Deco couches and students just sitting around having discussions with professors. It was like like there was no desks or anything in the classrooms. It was just like sit and talk. It's like there's a lake out back. Go sit and talk by the lake when it's nice out. So, but now it's like
a really, proper kind of school.
Yeah, it's a really big university. They have been growing, and especially the thing is they have this really nice new campus in Atlantic City. What they ended up doing was it's been financially kind of rough with Atlantic City. A lot of it's a big casino town. It made a lot of money in the 80s and early 90s when all the casinos moved in, but they started to leave the last 10 years. So they bought an old casino, and it's like because they have like a major that's in like
gambling.
No, like like tourism and like
blackjack dealing,
and like pretty much how to like business wise, like how to run like not necessarily a casino, but like a hotel management major and stuff like that. So they use that, and then they also have a culinary program, so they can. So so getting back to your question, I just didn't want to stay.
For one, you were in Jersey, and everyone who was in Jersey wants to leave Jersey.
That's actually true. It has right now, apparently, I read a report like 2 years ago, New Jersey has like the biggest exodus of any state right now. It might be changing a little bit, but for a while, that was definitely the case. As you know, like Hartford does give a lot of scholarship money.
Oh, I know firsthand.
Yeah. So like they pretty much, I ended up paying a little less than in-state tuition for if I was staying in New Jersey. Yeah. So it was like I could go away and still get equivalent to in-state. Looking back on it, I probably should just because I would have probably gotten scholarships in New Jersey too. Yeah. Could have cut back, but I wanted to go places, see something else. I'm glad I did though. I mean, I got a very good education here. So.
And you graduated when?
2012.
And were you always set on majoring in cinema, film, cinema? It's called cinema here.
Yeah. For the most part, I mean, I've always loved movies. I've been obsessed with them since I was like 5. But there was a time that I was really into all the music stuff in high school. But to be honest, I realized that I'm like, doing like jazz band, like concerts and like jazz festivals and stuff. I'm like, oh, I'm not that good. Like,
what'd you play?
Tenor saxophone.
Okay.
So it's like I can get by, but it's just like, and also I realized like, what am I going to do with a jazz performance degree?
I think most people who do that are trying to make it like as musicians, like gigging musicians.
Yeah. Yeah. And that just.
Or they end up teaching.
Yeah. The funny part is it wasn't until like my end of my junior year in college that I even thought about like going to get an MFA and so I could teach. It was a pretty quick turnaround because I decided like junior year and I'm like, okay, well, I got to start applying my senior year of college. So I made 3 films in like 6 months and put them all on my reel that I sent out. And then I got into grad school the next year. It was kind of crazy.
And that was University of North Carolina at Greensboro?
Yeah. It was interesting, really. It was kind of like, it's one of the, I guess, smaller campuses of like the whole UNC like network of schools. Chapel Hill's like the big...
The flagship kind of campus.
Yeah, but it was great. It was interesting because I knew that the program there was not very like narrative based. But then I was sitting there like the first day meeting all the other grad students in my class, and I realized I'm like, oh, one guy's a narrative filmmaker. Like, well, I figured there would be some people who that are narrative, even though like it's not really the school's main focus. And at the time, I was pretty much only making like really abstract experimental work, and then everyone else went around like, I'm a documentary filmmaker. And then I started talking to like the faculty, and they're like, I'm a documentary filmmaker. Like everybody was like documentary, which I mean, it's still nonfiction. To be honest, I think that's kind of what stood out on my reel is that I had a documentary on there. I had like a really short narrative. I had an animation and I had an experimental film on my reel for grad school. And the head of the grad program is a documentary filmmaker who loves and has like worked slightly in experimental film. But then in the 80s and early 90s, he did a bunch of like short like stop motion animations that like aired between like shows and commercials on Nickelodeon. Mm-hmm. And he worked and did a bunch of those. So it was like, I think he just saw someone that was like working in the same exact 3 mediums as he was. And he was just like, "Oh, this is great.
Yeah.
Get that kid here."
Well, do you remember any particular film that really piqued your interest? If you do remember anything as early as say 5, like you said.
Oh, well, I mean, probably I would say the best school sick day I ever had in my life was, it must have been like 6, and my mom was just like, "Okay, well, you're sick, so I don't want you like running around the house." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then there was like nothing, there's nothing on really for kids on a weekday.
No.
Morning. So she's like, "Oh," she like worked down the street at the local grocery store. She's like, "Do you just want to go over and we'll grab a movie?" Because like it's a small town at that point. There was like we didn't have there was no like Blockbuster or anything. There was like one like small video store on the other side of town, and then like the grocery store had a video department where you could rent films. So we went in. She's like, "Your brother really liked this. You want to watch this?" I'm like, "Sure." And it was Star Wars. Because my brother is 13 years older than me.
Wow.
He's my half brother. So like she was just like, she's like, "I don't know what kids like nowadays." Because both my parents were like 39 and 40 when I was born. So they're just like, so she's like, "I don't know. This is what was popular in the 80s."
Here, see a Star Wars.
Yeah. But here's the thing. We watched it. We went over at 9:30 in the morning to get it. Watched it. Had lunch. Went back, returned it, got the second 2, watched both in the afternoon. I watched all 3 in one day, and I was hooked. Yeah, so like it's weird because, I didn't start to get. Nowadays, I guess I watch more like what you would consider art films, but that didn't happen until I got to college. I'd never seen Citizen Kane before, like my first freshman class.
Yeah,
stuff like that. But it was really eye opening. I had a really interesting professor when I started first year.
Was it Lang?
Actually, no. It was very interesting because what ended up happening the year that I started, Professor Lang was on sabbatical writing a book.
Oh, okay.
So we had a visiting professor from NYU she was finishing her doctorate. She was just, pretty much the way your doctorate works. You'll like do coursework and then you have so much time afterwards to finish your thesis. And like during that time, she was like teaching while she was like spending 2 years to finish her thesis or so. This woman, Isabel Frida. And so she was teaching here. And then the following year, Professor Walsh went on sabbatical. So she was here for like 2 years. And we kind of just hit it off.
Any particular films that stand out in your mind that you saw?
I will say that it was probably one of the funniest reactions was in that class we watched Eraserhead. And it was just so interesting because it's a whole...
I've seen Eraserhead and...
the way that it used to work is that the whole class was just the incoming freshmen. Because before then, the rest of... Like now, pretty much anyone in the university can take a film studies course, the Intro to Film Studies, as an elective for like an art credit. That wasn't the case back then. So like there was only like 1 or 2 sections a semester. All the freshmen got put in one class. You could see all the freshmen film majors like, what the heck did they just make us watch? And me and one of my best friends, Mike, were just like, that was awesome. That was so cool. It's like it was nothing we'd ever seen before.
This came out the same time as Star Wars?
Well, to be honest, part of the other interesting thing about it is Eraserhead is shot really in a lot of industrial factories run down in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So it's like it's places I'd seen. So it was just like, I guess that also had a kind of connection, being like, oh, cool. I thought filmmakers were only from New York or LA. Like I thought, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wasn't really that aware of like independent filmmaking of like, you can just be passionate and like make it. Like I thought after I got a degree, I was 100% going to have to go to LA.
Yeah. I think Eraserhead was like David Lynch's kind of thesis film when he was at AFI. Mm-hmm. And he wrote, produced, and directed it himself.
Right. But to be honest, I don't even know if it ever counted because it took him like 8 years to finish it.
Yeah.
Because I think his only degree is like in fine art or something.
I think he has a degree in like painting.
Yeah.
From University of the Arts in Philadelphia. Yeah. But he did end up going to AFI Conservatory, and I think I'm pretty sure he got an MFA there, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
And from what I can tell, either Eraserhead was his thesis film, or he got started doing it
Yeah.
as his thesis film, even if it didn't end up being that.
Because there are a lot of like filmmakers that just didn't finish. Like they're, especially back then when like the first like film schools kind of. Herzog is famous for never finishing his degree and just stealing a camera from the university to shoot his first like 2 films on.
Yeah.
Like,
and then there are people who we hold in such high regard in the film industry who like never went to film school.
yeah.
Like Spielberg. Apparently his grades were just abysmal, so he went to Cal State Long Beach and studied English.
Yeah.
Or Christopher Nolan, who he couldn't get into film school, so he went to University College London where he studied English, but was able to like get into their facilities for the equipment.
Yeah. I mean, that was the hardest part for the longest time, just getting gear. It's so easy to get gear now. I bought a camera like 5 years ago for like $600. It still works great and it does exactly what I needed it to do. It doesn't shoot in 4K or anything, but I like the images I get out of it.
Was your trajectory always like documentary? If that seems to be the thing you're focused on?
Not really. I got more into. I mean, I'd made some documentaries like as an undergrad, but it wasn't really my thing. It was just like I was trying to learn everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was in grad school spending so much time with documentary filmmakers that kind of like I started to blur the line a little bit more of what nonfiction film could be. You know, when I started making films, I was like obsessed with like Stan Brakhage, which I feel like anyone that's like interested in like experimental film, it's the starting point. Because, you know, he's the kind of guy that started all the things where you would like scratch the film, work right on the film, stuff like that. But yeah, the project I'm working on now is probably most influenced by Chris Marker's more like essay documentaries and like Chantal Ackerman's like kind of more like structuralist and free-flowing documentaries. Like a big film I was like watching when I was like in pre-production for this is I think it's just called Letters Home, and she was like in her early 20s studying and like living in New York, and she lived so long in France, I think originally from Belgium, and it was just like these long like poetic shots of the city, and the voiceover over top of it is letters written from her mother to her. You know, it's a documentary, but it's definitely more in the like poetic mode of documentary. So that's kind of where I've leaned for a while. But the year after grad school, I spent my whole first year after grad school working with a former professor editing his film for him. So it took 9 months. He'd been working on the film for 8 years.
Yeah.
It's just.
What was the final runtime?
I think it's only like 88 minutes.
Oh, okay.
That's the thing. You gotta, especially for independent film, you gotta like know your market. Because at one time, our first cut was 3 hours, and then that's like you just gotta like. One of my favorite things. I've always loved editing, but like spending that year, it's like I love the process of like getting it down from that 3 hours to a tight 88, and it was great because you got to know your target market.
I wish Vim Vendors would have learned that.
Well, I mean, he was able to, you know, sell it and get it distributed a little bit better. Nowadays,
I know it was produced through his own company, but I'm not sure. It probably was some other company to distribute it.
Well, especially like that's the one thing we don't have here is that still in Europe there's so many great art councils and art grants where you can get funding from the state.
Yeah.
Very rarely is the U.S. government going to give you $10,000 to make art. Like
unless you're like a MacArthur fellow.
Yeah, there are certain fellowships. Like I know like pretty much all my professors from grad school at one point had like one like pretty much like a state like grants from North Carolina. They're pretty good about the arts.
When you were teaching the introduction to filmmaking class that I was in, what do you remember about, say, me?
Well,
this is my show. I get to talk about me.
That's fine. But
like what exactly stuck out?
Well, it was pretty obvious that you had some more experience than some of the other students with stuff. I think the thing that stood out the most is that I feel like I spend the first half of the semester, usually for that class, trying to make people understand both the workload it takes to make a film and the commitment you have to make a good film. And I think those two things were you kind of already understood going into the class.
Yeah.
And like I was surprised because you gave me the first like rough cut. You're like, can you look at this? And I think it was like 2 weeks after I gave out the final project assignment. It was just like you're just like, hey, I'm already starting to work on this. And part of the reason your film turned out so well is because you and I were looking at rough cuts of it before like a rough cut was ever due for class. Mm-hmm. So you were able to go through like 5 or 6 cuts.
Yeah.
And some people in the class changed their mind and shot a whole new film the weekend before it was due.
Yeah.
And the first cut was their final cut. And it showed. Like,
yeah. I think part of that was just the fact that I pretty much had pre-production down I had written a script in like the first, well, actually over in between semesters. Mm-hmm. So that when I came into the spring semester to take intro to filmmaking, I had pretty much had a draft of what I thought my final project was going to be.
Right.
And I think I handed a copy to you within like the first couple of weeks of class.
Yeah, you gave me a script before we even
like touched the screenplay part of the course.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what stood out most about you is at least, again, like you even admitted, you weren't, you didn't have all the skills really for some of the camera work, but like you took the pre-production time. I think it was a really good stepping stone. I'm excited to see the next like film you make because obviously you're going to be making something in animation, but that's a whole different beast.
Yeah, I think part of it was also I shot the entire film in a day because there was just one weekend where I was just like, for some reason, I really wanted it to be just myself.
Yeah,
I thought this is like my first real short. I pretty much have all the necessary equipment in order to get this done. I don't want to have to borrow anything.
Yeah.
Also, everyone had already borrowed all the other microphones.
No.
So I had a DSLR, my DSLR camera, which that's completely fine. I had my own like audio recording equipment, like this Zoom H4n that I'm recording onto now. A couple of dynamic mics, not unlike these. I suppose it was me problem solving, trying to I don't have shotgun mics, so I guess I'll use a dynamic mic, try to keep it out of frame and crank the gain so it acts kind of like a directional kind of shotgun mic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the other thing. You knew that, you had half a semester to make a 3 to 5 minute film, and you smartly kept it simple. You knew what you wanted to say, and I think one thing that helped is you worked with those obstructions. That's there's a great, I think one of his few documentaries is Lars von Trier has a documentary called The 5 Obstructions.
Yeah.
Where he pretty much a friend, colleague, former professor or something, he has this guy recreate a short film that the guy made in the 60s, but he's like, okay, you're going to remake it 5 times and I'm going to give you obstructions for each one, which is actually funny. That was my first assignment in grad school. First day of class, we watched that. And then the professor was like, here are your obstructions. Make a film. And that was the project for the first semester. So it was complicated because we had for that project, we had to shoot on film. Mm-hmm. So part of the obstructions, he even gave us this is the film stock you need to use. I think luckily mine kind of played in my favor of my style a little bit and more abstract and experimental, because I know one other person that got it, I think was more one of the people that was more narrative based. It was you can only have one cut in the whole film that is longer than 2 seconds. So it's I had to make a 3-minute film. It was black and white negative film stock, and it could only be 2 second cuts. So it was really abstract and intense. But luckily, I actually had shot on film before. Me and this one guy who was in his 40s in the program were the only people who had ever shot film. So it was just everyone's just spent the whole time and texting and calling me, asking me questions about these cameras. Mm-hmm. And I'm just yeah. And I was the only one that really knew well how to adjust the speed of the camera so you could do slow motion and things.
Yeah.
And we were using 60 millimeter Bolex cameras. So the other thing you can do is you have you can put this little key in and actually rewind the film So you can do like in-camera superimpositions over top of it. So, you could shoot something, rewind the stock back, and shoot another image on top of it.
Cool. It's kind of like in-production optical printing or something like that?
Yeah, it's like the earliest kind of like, well, not earliest, because I guess there was a lot of early masking for special effects. Actually, that might have been a few weeks ago it came out. I'm sure, just like you are a huge fan of just podcasts, like lots of different kinds. There was a great episode. I don't know if it was a repeat or a new episode from How Did This Get Made?
Oh, no, not How Stuff Works? Things You Should Know? Stuff You Should Know?
We're getting close. I just want to remember what the real title is. Yeah, Stuff You Should Know. And it was a whole episode on like movie special effects, but they focused a lot on talking about like, pre-digital effects and stuff. They did spend a whole lot of time talking about how they did the all the X-Wing and TIE Fighter stuff in the original Star Wars, because it's so fascinating, because all those like spaceship stuff, they're just still models. Like the models never move. It was like one of the first time that you had like completely like programmable, like automated like camera movement. So you'd program it so each camera move would look the same thing, and you'd do like an X-Wing, and then you'd do the same thing with like a TIE Fighter, but it would just be a single thing, and then you'd mask it and put it together in post.
Have you seen anything recently that you think is cool?
To be honest, I'm so busy. I very rarely get to see new things. Just like everybody else, that like sometimes I teach and I talk about like great movies like every day. Sometimes it's just hard to be like, sit down to watch a challenging film on your free time. Sometimes I'd rather just sit down, watch something really dumb on Netflix. Well, I mean, that's what I do all the time. Like, pretty much if I'm doing any kind of work or prepping for classes, I usually have like just like repeats of like the dumbest like TV shows on the background.
Well, I didn't mean, I wasn't presuming like what was the last like really challenging art house film you've seen, but
well, I mean, I don't even know if I've sseen any of last year's like Best Picture Oscar nominations. That's how much I mean. I'm not watching things, which is bad. I just been busy because teaching, trying to get my own film finished that I've been working on for like 3 years now.
And is that a documentary?
It's an abstract documentary, I guess.
Oh, okay.
It's a lot of found footage. It's not completely found footage. It's a lot of slides that I've kind of taken, because me and my dad have shot on the same Nikon camera. He bought it 1964, and he shot on it. Especially a lot of the photos I have from it that he like still had all the like slides for were pretty much all of his 20s. Like at 19, he gave me that camera. Still like almost perfect condition. I just have spent my whole entire 20s shooting on it. So it's kind of a lot of there's not as much footage per se. It's more like photographs and slides. Okay. A lot of the footage is actually imagery of the camera itself.
And is this a feature?
No, it's gonna be a short.
Like how short are we looking?
At one point I was thinking like 20, but it might be shorter. It's sometimes I hate to say it, but sometimes you just have to play to an audience a little bit more. I've made a lot of work where, it's gone to festivals, it's gone around and but it's really small, obscure, like extremely like art house festivals. Sometimes you just have to be like, okay, what are festival programmers looking for? Because, you want people to see your work. The other issue is as a filmmaker who is also a professor, to ever get a tenure track job, you just have to keep producing work. And unfortunately, sometimes that means, well, if you need to make a film every 3 years and that does well, then sometimes you got to play to like festival audiences a little bit and not just be like, this is art for art's sake. I mean, that's the hardest part about being a young filmmaker, is like figuring out distribution nowadays, because it's just so different. Students here like have web series on like YouTube and stuff. When I was started at college, YouTube was still like cat videos and then like early like vloggers. Yeah. And that was it. Like nowadays there's full on professional production companies that are just YouTube based. distribution has just changed so much already in just a decade that it's just sometimes hard to figure out like who your audience is and where your kind of target market is. Like I have a friend from grad school who also has like, he went after, while he's been teaching the last few years, he went back and got an MBA as well, because like a lot of he makes like, you know, actual feature-length documentaries. How do you sell a feature-length documentary when you're not associated with like a big production company? Because, you know, even some of the big docs the last few years, like, you know, they're backed by Netflix, stuff like that.
Yeah.
They have real money behind them.
Do you ever find yourself working in narrative more often than now? Or do you think you're, say, I don't want to say aversion to narrative filmmaking, but do you think that's because, like, do you write at all? Do you find yourself writing screenplays?
I have ideas for narrative work, and I have, you know, half scripts here and there, but I've never really been a writer. Writing and like English and all that stuff was really hard for me growing up. And my dad, who's been was a teacher for 40 years, I was like 18, 19, and he's like, oh yeah, I've seen like so many students. He's like, you definitely show the signs of like minor dyslexia. I'm like, why are you telling me this now? I struggled all throughout, like, you know, school, because the only way to remember things is I had to 100% memorize it. Like I couldn't sound anything out. I just had to like take a mental picture of it, and that's the only way I would could remember words. It was just funny. He's like, but you did really good in school. I'm like, yeah, but it was such a struggle. So I've just always been such a visual person. I think that's why I kind of, you know, lean towards filmmaking, and why a lot of my work not so much like the writing bit of filmmaking. Right. Like I have idea for like a narrative script that I've like, you know, bullet pointed out, things like that, but haven't really full on written the script. And that's partially because I feel like I would do so much better with like a writing partner. The same, like if I'm doing a more traditional documentary, one of the thing I've found out for me is it's really good to find a good producer, because I sometimes get so distracted in like the shooting of it, the story, the artistic side of it, I forget about things like calling places to get contracts and, you know, setting up meetings. Like that's, sometimes I can't focus on both things while I'm in production. I mean, leading up to pre-production, that's fine. But once I get into production, I realize for stuff like that, you need a good producer. Kind of going back to like we were saying earlier about just kind of like process and workflow. Like that's the other thing. You just have to, any filmmaker or any artist, you have to figure out what the best way work-wise works for you. Yeah. Like I know, like I work best in the morning. I'll get up between 5 and 5:30 and be working by 7, and then work all morning, get lunch, take my dog for a walk, come back, work for a few more hours, make dinner, and then if I have time, ideally sit down with a good book or a film that I've been meaning to watch. And that's like a good like work day for me. Yeah. That's kind of me for podcasting. Yeah. I find, so I started this in the summer. I think I told you before, I did like a dozen episodes before ever launching it. Mm-hmm. And part of that was so that I could give myself time to figure out like how to produce. Yeah. I'm glad I did take that time, because the first couple of recordings I produced and exported as like ready to be published episodes were not ready. They sounded terrible. You know, it was such a steep learning curve of me trying to figure out how to do this. To the point where like I would spend entire days trying to figure out what to do with my file, trying out different mixing procedures, different mixing techniques, and like marathoning through all the recordings I had at the time, applying like the same kind of workflow to them, because I figured if it works for one episode, it ought to work at least similarly for all of them. Yeah. And that's probably not the smartest idea, because I was like working on a computer with headphones on for like 12 hours at a time, and at some point my ears were almost about to bleed. But in fact, I'm still finding stuff in episodes I have produced that have yet to be released, that like it's been like a month since I touched them, and I come back to listen to them, and I'm like, oh wait, that doesn't sound good. And then I have to go
back and again reproduce the episode, get a good mix going, and then hopefully, like when I play it back in my car, it doesn't sound like shit.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're asking a lot of yourself to, schedule all these, produce all these, and host all these. It's a lot of work.
I mean, yeah. I don't have money to like hire a producer. All my money is going to like the hosting platform for my content, which, I mean, I guess it's not that much. It's like $15 a month. But then
Where are you hosting it?
Libsyn.
Okay.
Liberated Syndication. That's where like a lot of big shows are on there. Like my favorites, What the Fuck with Mark Maron.
Yeah.
And, if I'm paying that much a month to host the content, plus like all my other expenses of like gas to get here, to commute here, and it's like, I don't want to, I haven't had a job in a couple of years because commuting an hour here and overloading my course load, I'd probably kill myself.
Yeah.
And even if I did have a job, I don't think I make enough money to like hire like a real professional to produce my show.
Yeah.
And
I mean, if you could always find another student who has some audio engineering background.
I suppose, but then I would feel like disingenuous where I'm basically like, hey, show me how you do this. And then I just steal everything I could have paid them to teach me or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's because, again, I don't have money to hire anyone. So, or even like host a website. My website's on WordPress. Even though like the latest episode that's out right now, there's a bit about me talking about how much I hate WordPress.
Yeah.
But the only upside is it can be free.
Yeah, it's true. Think about my website's made with WordPress. I haven't updated. I haven't updated my website in like a year or so.
Yeah, I see the photo of you. You still have like a mullet or something.
That's probably probably a lot of my pictures are still like, I used to have like shoulder length hair. I had, by the end of grad school, I don't think I cut my hair from like my senior year of undergrad to the end of grad school. So it was like halfway like down my chest. Mm-hmm. Kept it up in a nice man bun all the time.
You still have like a bunch of hair. It's a pretty thick head of hair, and this beard you have going on.
Yep, that's been the look for a long time.
Maybe it's just me, but I can't stand having a lot of hair on my head. The way I'm put together, I run pretty hot already. And so like having a lot of hair on my head is just not a good idea, especially if I'm wearing glasses. And my glasses are black. And so these things on my face that absorb all the light and heat up, plus all this surface area in contact with my face while I'm like walking around campus from building to building. It'd be just, and I've done it and it's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I think mine comes from, I grew up in like a surfing, skating community. Yeah. Plus, long hair protects a lot of my very pasty skin. It's nice. Good?
Oh, we can be done if you want.
That's fine.
Cool.